From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. This is Said and Done. I'm Chris Kaiser, and joining me today is Simon Zubarek, who's the educational technologist here at the Columbia University Language Resource Center. Simon, welcome to the podcast, or should I say welcome back?
Hey, Chris, good to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me again. Good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're doing something a little unusual. We are doing this podcast as a live stream on YouTube. So if you are listening to this episode right now in the podcast app and you'd like to watch it on YouTube, you can certainly head over to the YouTube channel of the Columbia Language Resource Center. The URL is youtube.com/@ColumbiaLRC, all one word. And that's the @ Columbia LRC. So today, Simon, I wanted to speak with you about a topic that I think affects both of us, and I think it affects actually many people, which is really what happens at the higher levels of proficiency. You know, we can talk about some of the ways of measuring those levels of proficiency using either the framework of the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, or the Common European Framework of Reference. Those are two ways of measuring it. But really, I wanted to get more into kind of the experience of being a higher proficiency learner of a language. And really, the question is what happens after 10 years of studying a language, 15 years, or 20 years of studying a language? You know, language learning is a lifelong process. And so I wanted to kind of explore with you some of what you have encountered at these higher levels. And then we'll kind of flip the script and you'll ask me a few questions about what I've experienced on my recent trip to Italy, speaking Italian a lot, and you know, for the first time in 7 years in Italy. So let's start with you. Let's start with one of the languages that you discussed on the podcast last time, which is German. So could you tell me a little bit about what you perceive as your proficiency level in German, kind of do a self-assessment of your speaking and listening and reading and writing abilities in German?
Sure, yeah. So, in terms of German, I don't really need to do a self-assessment. I was formally assessed using the European Framework of Reference, where my level is C2. That would translate into superior, I would imagine, for ACTFL. And that would be more or less, roughly across the four basic scales plus culture, I would imagine.
So I guess then, so you have this kind of formal assessment of your language ability, but how do you kind of think of yourself in terms of your proficiency in German? How would you describe yourself? What adjectives would you use to describe your German proficiency?
Oh, at the moment, rusty.
Okay.
Yeah, for better or worse, I don't have very many opportunities to use it on a daily basis. But in a day of, let's say, my German abilities when they weren't as rusty, I would say that I was very comfortable functioning within German-speaking society. At that time, I was doing a year abroad in Vienna, Austria, where the Austrian variety of German is spoken, of course, so that required a little bit of adjustment from the standard Hochdeutsch taught throughout the American high school system, the university system. But it was I was fine at first. The beginnings were a little bit slow, full of faux pas and mistakes, and sometimes funny, sometimes embarrassing situations. But towards the end of my stay there, I had friends who were German speaking, which was very important for me. I had a partner there. I was attending university there. I had a part-time job, which I was able to do, and everything that's sort of related to it. So in many ways, it was very similar to what my life in the United States looked like in parallel before going to Germany. I'm sorry, going to Austria.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Hmm.
so it sounds like you were really using it as an everyday language and as a professional language.
Very much so.
Um, one thing that I've been thinking about recently is sort of this contrast of what are some victories in language and what are some struggles or ongoing challenges. So, can you think of maybe one of your more recent victories in German before I ask you then about what you are currently still kind of struggling with or challenged with? So, what's a victory for you that you've accomplished in German in recent times or in times that you can remember as being at
Right.
sort of the proficiency level that you're at now?
Yeah, the ancient times, or the recent times. I think that any sort of victorious moments that I've experienced in German would likely have to do with just being able to uh, use it in a context that requires cultural and idiomatic sensitivity. So any sort of idiomatic expressions that are timed just right, they're well calibrated that to elicit the response that you are seeking to elicit. Like that is extremely difficult to do, and that is not something you're likely to learn in the formal context. And I did have a couple of moments like that. One of them that I can think of was yes, when I use this idiom, which in German is hier liegt der Hund begraben, which translates directly into English as here is where the dog is buried. Um,
What what does that mean? What does that mean idiomatically, I guess?
idiomatically, it would be, this is it's where you are pointing at the crux of an issue, of a problem. Like this is the focal point. This is what we need to be paying attention to, right? It is not something that is used in everyday speech. It may even be somewhat of an outdated idiom. But I was able to use it, and did so in a way that elicited kind of just like, oh, wow, okay, you know things like that. Okay, that was impressive. Yeah, nice.
So it was
So
like a felicitous moment. You interjected
yeah, that's a
that
very good
people
way
like
to
love.
put it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um, so then on the flip side, as you think about your German, and maybe if you were to go back to a German-speaking country, what is something that you feel like even after studying so long and attaining this high level of proficiency, what is something that you think you might struggle with or be working on? What is the next thing that you would want to work on in the language?
Um. So yeah, there are a couple things. One things that I'm one of the things I'm really interested in, apart from, of course, learning more about the idioms and getting deeper into the culture of the language, would be to sort of learn more about the current colloquial German, which could encompass German slang, either synchronically or diachronically across various generations of speakers. This is not something again that we or that one learns in formal schooling. It is something that is very much used on a daily basis. It appears on the internet. It appears in press. If people read the press still. Um, and I'm utterly unfamiliar with it. So I would really, really like to learn more about it.
How would
And
you do that? What would be your strategy for doing that?
frequently, on German Reddit, where I sometimes, find myself uh, stumbling into these really interesting expressions, which I can kind of sort of figure out from the context. And of course, there is no way of looking it up, right? I mean, it's like you can go to the dictionary and see what these things mean. So one way to right, I guess participating in these exchanges in these contexts would be surefire way to learn it, whether it's in online communities or in real life, one way or the other. I think, and I really don't know if there's any other way, honestly, to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I got
Hmm.
you. Okay, so I kind of have a sense of where you are with German. I'm going to ask you about English in a second, but before I do, I wanted to say a few things. I wanted to say that thanks to the magic of live streaming, we can interact with people who are commenting. So I see that we have a
Oh,
few comments. One from Allah, who teaches Russian here at Columbia. Hi, Allah. Good to see you. Um, and she says there's an identical phrase in Russian about a buried dog with the same meaning as in German.
well, there we go.
And we also have Felice, who is an instructor of Italian here at Columbia. Ciao, Felice. Welcome to our live stream. Okay, so why don't we pass then to English? So
Mhm.
just to review, what are the languages that you speak, Simon?
So I speak Polish, German, a little bit of English. I took a couple of semesters of Russian in graduate school. I did also a few semesters of Latin in undergrad, although that is, one doesn't speak it, right? I mean, it's contentious. We don't have native speakers. So,
So with English, it's the language of your everyday life now. It's the language of your professional life and your scholarly life. So um, it seems to me like it might be kind of hard to ask you what is a recent victory for you in English, but maybe it's not. I don't know. How do you think about this? How do you think about your use of English when you're so immersed in it and have been for so long? Can you say that there's been a recent victory and that there's something that you're struggling with? Or don't you really, or do you not conceive of it really in those terms?
um, I don't think I struggle with a lot of things anymore. I think that there are a few areas that tended to be challenging for me. One of them being the fact that English has nominal articles, definite and indefinite. So the, an, which are lacking in Polish, majority of Slavic languages, I think, except for Bulgarian. So going from a language that just doesn't really acknowledge that such a device is necessary to a language that fully uses those is it's quite a cognitive jump. Um, and likewise, this is not something that is tremendously well explained in formal education. I think part of the reason is because we're still trying to figure out what these articles do in the first place, at least in the English context. There are a lot of theories about the subject. Also, another thing that is kind of not really emphasized in schooling is a stress pattern in English.
Yeah.
Phonologically
Can you
stress
give an
pattern.
example of that?
Yeah, sure. So, English kind of has this very strict stress pattern, and it is semantically significant. I mean, it is this distinguishing feature. So, for instance, a White House is something completely different than the White House, right? Or White House, right?
So
Um,
I see, I drove past a White House is different from I drove past the White House.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Whereas if
this
you
also
say,
exists for nouns and verbs. Advise, right? Two different things. And yeah, for learners of the language, um, I think I feel pretty strongly this is an area that where real struggle happens. Um,
so is there something that you feel like is a recent victory for you in English?
yeah. It actually happened last year. My whole life, I have been convinced that the word cemetery is spelled cementary. There's a T there, which
Yeah.
obviously there isn't. But I only learned that when about a year ago when I was 36. So up until then, I've been walking around just convinced that it makes sense. Everything there is made out of stone and concrete, so it would be
And nobody
it
ever
would be cemetery.
well, I guess that goes to show you that language learning truly is a lifelong endeavor.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, another one is solstice.
okay.
I used
So
to
like,
think it's solstice.
oh, solstice. Okay.
So things like that.
Right. So are you, side note, are you appreciating the summer solstice that's approaching and giving us the Manhattan Henge?
Yeah, now that I actually know how to say it.
Okay. Um, by
Yeah.
the way, this is not language related, but I really don't like Manhattanhenge. I think it's the greatest act of rebranding that ever has happened. So that's the thing where the sun reaches a certain point and it's like directly in line with the buildings in Manhattan. And so the sun shines, in the evening from the west to the east, and it just blinds you and you're like, "Oh my God." And then suddenly there was Manhattanhenge and everybody loves it and they take pictures of it.
Yeah,
Um,
and if you want to take a picture of it, you will have to, punch your way through all the tourists and photographers.
okay, are there any
Mhm.
other ongoing struggles that you feel that you have still with English that you can think of?
Not really, because this is just something that operates at a level of the subconscious, right? It's not like yeah, I don't think about it assertively. It's just sort of there, and if there are victories, they're pretty significant, but they're few and far in between. So
Gotcha. Okay, so
yeah,
shall we flip over to the other side?
yeah, let's do that. So
Oh, by the way,
Chris, yeah.
before we do, we have a comment from Alessandra in the Italian department. Hey, Alessandra, good to hear from you.
Wait,
Okay.
Alessandra is from she's from northern Italy, correct?
No, I think she's from central Italy.
She's from central Italy, but you were just in northern Italy.
Okay, so yeah, I was just in northern Italy,
Hmm.
um, and that's where my family is from, and I've talked about that on another episode of the podcast. But it had been 7 years since I had been to Italy, and um, but I was still practicing Italian because I speak with people in the Italian department in Italian sometimes. There was a person working here at the Language Resource Center who speaks Italian, and we would always speak Italian. So my Italian has gotten better, um, and in ways that I hadn't quite gauged before. So when we're talking about like victories versus challenges, I also did an assessment of my proficiency. I did an OPI, oral proficiency interview, according to the ACTFL scale, the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Languages scale. And this was about 5 years ago, and I was given the rating of superior but not distinguished. So kind of like one below the highest you can get. And I was really curious, like what distinguishes, distinguished from superior, and how
Right.
can I get up to that next level? And I knew that it takes a long time. Um,
Hmm.
so I asked the person who was doing the test, because she was doing this kind of as a practice test. So I was able to talk with her, and she said, uh, you know, somebody who is superior, or sorry, somebody who's distinguished would have a greater economy of expression. You are tending to answer questions in kind of long paragraph length responses, whereas somebody at a higher level might say something that's a sort of a culturally relevant reference, or an aphorism, or a kind of set phrase, or a specific pithy word. And so for 5 years, I've been trying very hard to like memorize and learn little sayings, little aphorisms. And that's something that you mentioned too in
Hmm.
German. And just kind of, I was so excited to go to Italy and speak Italian because I was waiting for like the right moment to just deploy some of these.
So what were some of the right moments, or maybe just one that you can
So,
remember and
so
share?
one that happened last week, um, when I was in Milan. I was staying in an Airbnb, and the person who owned the Airbnb met us there, as my parents met up with me in Milan for the second half of my trip. And she was showing us around the Airbnb, and she was saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be coming in," because it wasn't planned that she would be there. And I said in Italian, "Fai come se fossi a casa tua," which means, the idiom means make yourself at home, but you wouldn't say it quite that way. What it kind
Mhm.
of really means, non-idiomatically, is make as if you were in your own home, or do as if you were in your own home. So the
Mm.
thing is, it was her own home, so it's kind of like a play on words, and so it was just kind of like and she was like, "This
Ah.
is my home." She said, "This is my home." I said, "Exactly." So it was just like the perfect little, comment for the
Mhm.
situation, and I was, it just and the moment passed, but I was so happy, I was so pleased with myself because I'd been trying for 5 years to pull off one of these little comments. So
Mhm.
that's, that's something that I was very happy with, and I had another one of those, a little earlier in my visit. So there's a phrase, the fish smells from the head, il pesce puzza dalla testa, which means, if there's a problem in sort of a group or a team or whatever, the problem comes from the person in charge. So
Hmm.
there's a situation where this was a very relevant comment, and I used it, and the people that I was with were like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." So
Hmm.
I was I was very
Good
happy.
assessment.
Um,
Can you think of any of these idioms that didn't quite land, or some of the things you were trying to do that I don't want to say backfired, but didn't elicit the sort of response that you're hoping for, um, or
yeah,
some of the things that you are maybe more sensitive to right now, and more cognizant of wanting to work on more.
yeah. So I didn't have any idioms backfire on me this time. It's happened in the past,
Oh yeah.
mostly because I was trying to translate an idiom from English into Italian, and it didn't work. I
Hmm.
would say I had 2. So one thing that I did that I think really helped was, so I was visiting a lot of family members, and, um, and I kind of indicated to them what my role was with them. So I felt like people understood who I was, what I was there for, and
Hmm.
what I was all about, and that I think really helped them to interact with me in a way that I was able to do. And I kind of told them, I kind of indicated to them that my Italian was maybe a little worse than I felt that it actually is. And so I felt like I could sort of go at maybe 93%, of what I would be capable of. And that made
Hmm.
it so that I was able to go for like all day speaking in Italian with a bunch of different people. One thing I've struggled with in the past is just getting tired, just
Hmm.
trying really hard not to make any mistakes, which is, maybe not the best strategy, and just getting so exhausted at the end of it, so that I wasn't able to speak particularly well. And by saying, okay, I'm not going to try to be super accurate, I'm just going to try to be interactive with people. I think that really helped, and it allowed me to really go for like a full day, and then multiple days in a row. I don't know if you've experienced that too, like tiredness.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I experienced that, speaking English daily. It comes to a point you can't do anymore. But what I wanted to say is that now that you're talking about sort of being able to establish your identity as an Italian speaker, to yourself, but also to your interlocutors, and then just not trying to be perfect when communicating. Those are some of the strategies that result in the lowering of the effective filter, as we call it in the biz. So
What's that?
the effective filter. Oh, the way I understand it is this sort of subconscious mechanism that uh, dictates how, or maybe put it another way, just like the voice at the back of your head, sort of giving you feedback on how you communicate in the
Yeah,
target language.
and it kind of like holds you back a little bit. It
Right.
prevents you from just getting it out.
Sometimes it can do that. Sometimes it motivates and helps, right? Um, but most of the time, it kind of holds you back. So, yeah, I mean, those are pretty good strategies, I think, for lowering that, and sort of having it work to your advantage.
Yeah, and it only took me 20 years of studying the language to learn how to do that.
Yeah, but that's like, you see, like that's another thing that is not necessarily emphasized or even pointed out in formal language education, right? Like, what do you do with this? Like, everybody has this voice of everybody has to deal with effective filter at some point. Like,
Yeah.
how do you manage that thing? And what you just talked about are two great examples.
I think the thing that really helped on this trip was just being so happy to see these people, these relatives of mine, after not seeing them for 7 years. All I was thinking about was, "Oh, I can't wait to talk to this person. I'm so excited to hear what they have to say, what they've done." And so I wasn't thinking, "Oh, how am I coming across to this person? How am I
Hmm.
seeming to them?" It was just like, "Let me talk to you and let me hear about you and let me feel joy in speaking with you. This was the first time that I felt really like a deep joy at speaking Italian, as opposed to kind of joys mixed with anxiety and nervousness.
Mm.
Um,
Well, that's great.
yeah,
That is great. Um, yeah, I don't know if yeah, I don't know. Just thinking of it in terms of language instruction. I don't know if this is something that we can necessarily replicate, right, in the language classroom, or to do it easily.
well,
Um,
that's a good question. I
yeah.
mean, to me, one thing you could potentially do is try to give students, and again, this is, more for students in the first years of learning a language, kind of give them of a framework of thinking, what are they doing in a specific task or activity, and saying, okay, what is your role in this activity? And that might be one way of reducing it.
Mm-hmm, So that, yeah, I like that idea. I think could be implemented. Of course, every the time is short in the language classroom, as we all know. So there's so many things to cover, so many things to pay attention to. So one needs to pick and choose things very carefully. But when speaking of picking and choosing, what are some of the things that you would like to keep working on in your very advanced Italian proficiency, so that maybe one day, if that's your goal, you can reach the distinguished ECFA level.
Yeah, one thing that was on my mind was kind of I was spending all day with this cousin of mine who herself is a language teacher, so she has a sensitivity to this kind of thing. She teaches English. And I
Mhm.
said, I asked that same question, what do you feel is something that I could improve? And she said, your accent is pretty good, but it's not quite right. And I said, okay, what's wrong? Or, what do you think is what could be better? And she said, I don't know, I can't really say. I said, okay, do an impression of me. Do your impression of me. And she was kind of
Mhm.
embarrassed, but then she did it, and so she spoke to me in the way that I was speaking to her, and
No,
I heard what she was doing. I'm like, "Ah, that's what I'm doing." So it was
what
I
was
kind of
it?
heard myself. Well, and I kind of asked her about this. So in Italian, the vowels are there are fewer vowel sounds in Italian than there are in English, and these vowel sounds are all what are called tense vowels. There's 7 of them, and they don't have vowels in Italian that are like the vowels in English that are lax vowels. They don't have, for example, the sound that's very characteristic of American English, which is the schwa sound, which is like uh, like wha what or water, that kind of
Mhm.
sound, that doesn't exist. So I have a tendency, I think all Americans do, of having the vowel sounds kind of migrate a little bit towards the center of the vowel space and be more like schwa, um,
Mhm.
more like and so we're practicing with the word, for when, which is cuando, and so as I just said it now, I can kind of even hear it. It wasn't quite right. It needs to be more like cuando, something like that. So a little more out in vowel space, more to more front, I think, more front and high than I just said it. So I think that the next thing for me to work on is really the vowels, but I don't know. I don't think it'll be easy because when I was
Yeah.
doing it and I did it like 20 times and she said, "Oh, that was the right one." And I said, "Oh, that's not me. I just can't say it like that. It doesn't feel right." Um, and and so I don't know if I'll feel comfortable doing it the way that she felt I should be doing it. So I might just say, "Okay, this is how I speak Italian, and that's it."
That is just part of my identity as a speaker of the target language, and that is how it's going to be. Boom. Yeah, because
Um,
otherwise, dealing with this effective filter, for all just making sure that all your vowels are stressed and you don't reduce any of them, that's a lot of work.
yeah. So I think that really the victory then, as we're talking, I didn't realize it at the beginning, but really the victory for me was just saying, "Okay, I'm not gonna worry about all this stuff, like, am I getting the vowels right or am I doing the right aphorism?" Just like, be in the experience
Hmm.
and just appreciate it for what it is and don't worry. And I think maybe that, lesson, which took me 20 years to learn, is something that can be applied at all levels.
I think it can also be applied to this very live cast, right?
Right, it is kind of intimidating to be on the live, YouTube
Mhm.
Live, but I think we pulled it off. So we're at our half-hour mark, which
Um,
that you'd like to share?
Hold on a second. I may have spoken too soon because it interrupted on my end. Can you repeat that?
Yep. I said, Simon, I feel like we've pulled it off with the live cast. Do you have any other comments or reflections that you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to thank everyone who came today. We definitely did not anticipate anyone showing up, but but it's great to have you here. Thank you. And yeah, we hope to do more of well, mostly Chris, really, more of these live casts in the future. There is a podcast that Chris has mentioned as well, which is really good. I do listen to it on a regular basis and highly recommend it. Yeah, what else? Not
Yeah,
much, right? That's kind of
I
it.
yeah, so I wanted to sort of get in a podcast episode because we needed one for June, and I was so excited to talk about my experiences in Italy and to hear about how they kind of resonate with your experiences, Simon, speaking English and German. I wanted to, think about how we could use this live cast not just for the podcast, but for other things that we
Yeah.
might do at Columbia. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you everybody who watched all the way to the end, and I wish you a happy Friday afternoon
And good weekend.
and a good weekend. See you.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye bye.